Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. Today I was walking around the shops, and as a particular festive holiday approaches, it is noticeable that shops have started putting out certain festive products, one of which is the classic tin of biscuits. And you might be forgiven for thinking this is a tin of biscuits, because it is a tin. But it is, of course, not a tin of biscuits, but considering what I paid for it, it may as well have been. This is, of course, the Harry Potter miniatures adventure game from Knight Models, and to be specific, this is the first edition of the Harry Potter miniatures adventure game from Knight Models. Let's get this out of the way first. I'm not a big fan of Harry Potter. I do, of course, appreciate how successful Harry Potter has been and the success it had in getting more children to read, and I think that's an amazing thing. But for me personally, I just didn't like it. So it seems a little weird, perhaps, that I have purchased a Harry Potter game, but there are reasons for that. First and foremost, while Harry Potter might not be something that I'm particularly keen on, I am keen on the idea of wizards in magical duels throwing spells at each other, and that is pretty much what you are getting with the Harry Potter miniatures game. You are getting wizardly duels between rival factions. Second of all, this game is designed by Mark Latham, and Mr. Latham, as far as I'm concerned, is on 3 strikes and you're out. He has previously worked on the Walking Dead All Out War game, and he also worked on the Elder Scrolls Call to Arms game. And both of those games are games that I really should have liked. They're games that had some really interesting game mechanisms, and yet I didn't like them. They're both games that I could see the good things about them. I could see what they were trying to achieve with them, but for me personally, those different elements didn't come together in a cohesive way to make fun, engaging games. But having always seen that there is good design stuff in his games, I think he's always worth checking out, even though potentially in for a situation here where, once again, I am not overly impressed. But perhaps the most important thing of all in deciding to purchase this game was the price. I was cruising around Amazon the other day and I found this listed for just £15. And this game includes some double-sided game mats, and it includes 13 resin miniatures. And for me, just the boards and the miniatures were well worth £15. Because obviously playing Dungeons & Dragons, playing Rangers of Shadow Deep, I can always make use for extra miniatures, especially really nicely designed ones, and Knight Models do make nice miniatures. The listing that I found on Amazon was actually from Knight Models, and they were listing the 2nd edition, but I did think that was a little dubious that they would be selling the 2nd edition for just £15. But I paid my money and sort of crossed my fingers and thought, well, let's see what we get. As it turns out, I got the 1st edition. I wasn't overly upset about that because, as I said, the main draw for me were the miniatures, although, as I understand it, the miniatures in the 2nd edition are a different type of resin and they are more robust, they're less likely to break, they're less fragile. But I can handle slightly fragile miniatures, I'm okay with that. But I did mention it to Amazon, I did go to them and say, well look, they're listing this as a 2nd edition product, but I was sent a 1st edition product, and I was actually issued a part refund for it, and ended up getting this game for £7. So I can't really complain about anything, although I probably will. All told, what I've ended up with, besides a very long, meandering story, is a set of things I'm probably going to use in Dungeons & Dragons, but which I'm also going to check out as a game in its own right. So for now, I'm just going to sort of dive into the box. I'm going to show you what you get in this 1st edition, talk about what has potentially changed for the 2nd edition, or what I understand has changed for the 2nd edition, and we'll go from there, I guess. First of all, of course, you get your rule book, and this is quite a slim volume. It's got a lot of scenarios in the back. The rules themselves are pretty slim. I do not know what rules changed between the 1st edition and the 2nd edition, if any changed at all. The 2nd edition seemed to come out pretty much straight after the 1st edition, and I'm assuming that most of the rules are the same. If anybody knows what differences there were between the 1st and 2nd edition of the rules, Do please let me know in the comments because I would be interested to know. But overall, I don't think there's a lot of changes. Looking through the rulebook, having read through the rulebook, I can see Mark Latham's involvement. I can see similarities between this game and Walking Dead, All Out War, and Elder Scrolls Call to Arms. They all have character cards with slots where you can attach items, extra items and abilities. They all have these extra cards that you pull in play. There are, in this game in particular, there are quest cards and adventure cards, and you draw these at certain times, and they have environmental effects, but also certain objectives that you can go after within your game to get extra victory points. And those are all sort of things that I've seen in Elder Scrolls Call to Arms and to a lesser extent All Out War. So I can certainly see some similarities there. Also, the rules are a little bit gappy, they're a little bit flaky. There are certain things where you think, well, hold on, I'm not quite sure how that works, and that's also something I was familiar with from my plays of Elder Scrolls. But overall, I would say this is a much more streamlined game than that, despite the fact it has certain similarities. It looks pretty clean in terms of what it's doing. It does have options for playing versus an opponent or cooperatively or solo. Again, that's all things that we saw in Elder Scrolls Call to Arms. But it seems a little bit cleaner here, a little bit more straightforward. There's a lot less AI things to deal with. And overall, it just seems like it's a tidier design, but obviously I haven't played yet to know for sure. Overall, having flicked through the rules, I'm certainly going to give it a try. I'm not just going to chuck the rulebook in the bin and keep the miniatures. I am actually going to give this one a shot with my daughter, who seemed quite keen to play. Next up, there are 3 sheets of tokens and overlays, and this is something that I know was upgraded for the 2nd edition, because these 1st edition ones are ghastly thin. These are the thinnest tokens I have ever seen in my life, and I have played the Alien vs Predator game. Yeah, these are very, very, very thin, which is a shame because some of them would be quite useful for Dungeons and Dragons, particularly these overlays here. There are things like pits and there's something creepy going on in there. And there's rock outcrops and things like that. And these are useful things that if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons on a square mat, you can just chuck those down and get some extra utility out of those. They are on 30mm squares, so the squares are pretty big, but yeah, you could get some use out of those. So it's a shame they're on the really thin stuff. 2nd edition sorted that out. I was particularly interested in the double-sided map boards in this game, and you get 3 of them, and they're pretty nicely illustrated. We have, again, these are 30mm squares, and overall the boards, they're not big. You're looking at 16 inches this way by about 8.5 this way, because there is a little border around them. But you get 3 that have the sort of ruined Hogwarts on one side, and then a forest on the other. And you can chuck down one of these for Dungeons and Dragons if you need an encounter at a campsite or something. One of these on its own is more than good enough. But of course, you're getting 3, and each one has a Hogwarts side and a forest side. And the artwork's pretty nice, and you can lay these out side by side in a variety of configurations, and you can get a pretty decent sized board. Here's the 3rd tile, again with the forest on the reverse. And when they're all laid out, that's a pretty decent size for a Dungeons and Dragons encounter, I would say. Again, you're looking at 16 inches this way, and about 22 inches that way. And there's a quick look at the reverse. These are pretty nice. They have nice clear artwork, matte finish. The forest side is a little bit dark, and the folds aren't great, and the edges aren't bound or treated in any way. As far as I understand it, for the 2nd edition, the boards were redone. I think the artwork was brightened up, but the artwork is otherwise the same. And I believe they finished the edges off properly, and they had a more robust join along the center. Regardless, that's a pretty nice set of double-sided tiles that I'm sure I will get some use out of in various different campaign situations for D&D. You get 6 dice, 3 white, 3 black, and at first glance these look pretty cool. They've got a special symbol instead of a 6, but they appear to be just printed rather than engraved, and I think for the second edition they removed the symbol for some reason and they just replaced the black dice with blue ones. I don't know if those new ones are engraved or not, but there was obviously something with these dice that meant that they were replaced for some reason in subsequent editions. But they're kind of cool. You get a whole wedge of these cards, and these are junk. They are not very good cards. They have horrible cutting on the corners and things. And the layout's a little iffy. The text isn't that easy to read. You get quest cards, adventure cards, and campaign cards, which do different things during the scenarios. And you get character cards for each of the characters, and these remind me a little bit of Elder Scrolls Call to Arms in that they're not laid out particularly well. You've got an image of the miniature there with a name. This one's called Death Eater 1 because he had particularly unimaginative parents. This is the cost to put this particular character on your force. There are traits down here, and then there's some different types of values up here. We've got magic, temper, courage, and wisdom, all in different fonts and all represented by numbers. We have an innate ability, which is a spell or a type of attack. In this case, it is a spell, which is like a slightly smaller version of a regular spell card, which they could have just had a note here to say to include that particular card rather than shrinking the text down so it's even less readable. And then over here you've got 3 other traits. This isn't just pretty artwork. We have 3 traits. We have Mastery, which is actually represented by the number of wands up here. So rather than a number, like this stuff over here, you count the number of wands. We've got Defense, where you count the number of shields up in that little symbol there. And then we have Cunning, which is represented by a number, but it might be a white number or a black number, depending on whether you have light magic or dark magic. This is a Death Eater, of course, so black symbol, dark magic. But yeah, they're a little bit cluttered, and it's a sort of a combination of symbols and numbers and shrunk down cards and all sorts of weird stuff. I think possibly one of the weirdest things about this game is that most of the characters don't have an integrated attack option, a physical attack option. For example, none of the heroes, none of the good guys have an ability to attack in hand-to-hand combat at all, and they don't have any combat spells either, so you have to actually pick items or spells that will give them those additional combat options. Otherwise you have a team which can't attack. This particular character doesn't have an attack option. You have to actually equip him with a weapon or a spell that will allow him to do that. Whereas the acromantulas, the spidery things, here's an acromantula. They do have an innate ability to attack without using a spell. They have a bash. But yeah, otherwise, if you don't have an ability like that on your card and you don't take a spell or an item that allows you to attack, you have a character on your force that cannot attack. And I don't know whether that's clever or stupid. I haven't decided yet. It's kind of clever because it means you can have characters on your team that aren't focused on attacking and hurting people, but are focusing on completing objectives. And being a Harry Potter game, there's a lot of focus on completing objectives and scoring victory points by doing clever things rather than just beating up the opponent. But kind of feels like everyone should at least have a basic attack option of some kind. In addition to the deck of large cards containing the campaign cards, event cards, quest cards and character cards, you also get a wedge of small cards which contains your spells, potions, artifacts, and also adventure cards. So here we have a spell card, which again, it's a little bit all over the place. It kind of makes sense because you will put a dial token in the middle of the spell and it begins pointing up, and then as you cast it you have to rotate it round, and then you have a cooldown which goes around the edge of the card, and as the dial turns eventually it will point upwards again and you can cast the spell again. So there's an interesting resource management in the casting of spells. And there are a lot of spells that don't actually just do damage, they do other types of things, like they make it so that somebody can't move, or they make it so that they can't use a weapon for a turn, or it makes you invisible. There's lots of cool wizardy things, and I do like the idea of having all these different types of spells that enable your wizards to outwit your opponent rather than just straight up fighting all the time. I don't know how that plays out in an actual game, but it's a neat idea, a neat concept, and there's a good wedge of different stuff in here. Certainly enough to get going with. Not necessarily enough items and things to really kit out your people. I think there's like 1 knife and 1 sword in the artifact deck, which means 2 characters in the game can actually have a physical attack alongside any spells they bring. But the focus is more on the spells than just running at people and hitting them with swords. So, yeah, it kind of makes sense. But of course, the biggest draw for me was the miniatures that you get in the box. You get 13 in total, and they're a mixed bag, really. They're resin and I guess fragile, from what I've heard. You get 5 acromantula swarms, which are swarms of spiders. This was one of the things I was particularly keen to get because I can always make use of swarms of spiders in D&D and in adventure games in general. They're okay. There's not massive amounts of detail in them. One of them is a different coloured resin. I don't know why. I thought when I first opened the tin that they had coloured certain miniatures in a lighter colour for a purpose, but I think it might just be a different batch of resin or something. I don't know. But yeah, you get 5 of these. They're on 22mm integrated bases, which is a slightly weird size, I guess. The main human-sized figures are, of course, on 30mm bases, in line with the squares on the game board. In addition to the acromantula swarms, you get 1 bigger acromantula, which is still not very big and is still on a 22mm base. And again, it's not hugely detailed, it's detailed enough. It's showing some of the common issues you get with resin. We've got a stem here. You can see we've got some underfill on the back of the body that we need to get in and carve that out. There's signs of, you know, the common resin things that can be a pain to deal with, but it's not a bad miniature, it's just not great. I think for a lot of people, the main draw of this box will be our 3 main characters. You get 3 of the Spice Girls. You get Posh Spice, Ginger Spice and Baby Spice, which is Hermione, Ron and Harry. And you can see here, this is where Night Models excels. Look at the detail on Hermione's face. Absolutely fantastic. I am not entirely sold on this pose. And I can see why people were worried about wands and things, and I can see why people reported damaged and broken wands. Obviously, I haven't assembled her yet. She has some additional components, which are on a different sprue. Lots of cleanup on this. So this is Harry. Harry has 2 separate arms and separate legs. And they're pretty much keyed. Every piece is keyed to go a certain way. There's not a lot of components to each one. But again, you've got a little bit of cleanup. Not as much as Hermione. He's not so floaty and spindly, but we've got a big chunk of resin just hanging off the cape there. That all needs to be dealt with. We have a separate arm here, and possibly a missing arm by the looks of it. I think I might be missing a set of arms. Oh no, I think that might be his arm there. There's another frame with another bunch of wands on it, and I think yeah, I think that's his other arm there. Again, lots of, yeah, it does say Harry on there. It says Harry, but that's definitely not all Harry's arms. Harry, as far as I remember, did not have 3 arms. I'm wondering if that just says Harry because it is the Harry Potter miniatures game. That could well be it. Unless there's a particular curse which spawns an extra arm. But yes, I think that's Harry's arm there. And then one of these is his other arm. And this wand in particular, good grief. That's a very thin wand indeed. I don't know. I'll figure out whose arm is whose. I think those two might be Harry's. Is that Harry's wand? They all look different, don't they? Everyone's got their own unique looking wand. But I don't know whose is whose. Next up we have Ron. And again, that's a nicely done miniature. Lots of really nice detail with some separate legs. And again, keyed to go a certain way. I'm sure the arms are keyed as well once they're off the frames and not as difficult to figure out as I have made it look in this video. He goes that way, I guess. Yes, there you go. Slightly sassy pose for Ron. And I guess some of those arms on those other sprues are his. But while those are all well and good, they're not particularly a lot of use to me, other than in this game. I don't have a lot of use of wizard school children in Dungeons and Dragons, but what I can always find a use for are some creepy masked cultist looking guys. And that's what we have here with these Death Eaters. I am not sure whether I have a broken wand there or what, or whether he's supposed to have nothing in his hands, or I don't know. I'm not sure. Is that? Let's try and get it to focus. That'd be nice. Is that a broken wand? I don't know. I don't think there's any bits in the bag or the box, but it looks like he should have a wand there. But I'm kind of thinking that I can probably replace wands with weapons and things and turn these into a suitably intimidating group of cultist types. They're nice sculpts anyway. Here's another one. He's got an arm off. Must be on that sprue we looked at before. Or at least I hope it is. Again, we've got a little bit of cleanup, but nothing too much. That's quite a cool pose. We have this one, which is more of an action pose and comes in the two parts. Wand arms attached this time. That's very cool. I like that one. And then we have this one, who has a gnarly bit of leftover resin on the top of her head there, but otherwise is, if I can do that, a pretty nice looking miniature. It's just that's a lot of resin on her head that needs to be cut off. It's a lot to deal with, but yeah, that's very cool. And as I mentioned, all of those guys go on 30mm bases, which have the Knight Models injection molded cobblestone finish on them. So I feel like I've talked quite a long time about an edition of a game that doesn't really exist anymore. But I guess copies of these are still in the wild. There's still going to be stores selling them off. I guess Knight Models is selling off some leftover stock, and you'll probably see some of these turning up on eBay and things like that. So hopefully for anybody who has seen a secondhand copy of this and is thinking what are the components like, this video might help. But also, really, I just wanted to sort of show that there's some cool stuff in here that might be useful in Dungeons and Dragons and Rangers of Shadow Deep. I can certainly see myself using the Death Eaters and the Acromantulas, and even if that's all I use from this box, and occasionally maybe using the double-sided boards, I think I've got more than my money's worth for the £7 this tin cost me. But I have already gone on for far too long, so I'm going to end this video here. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please consider pressing the like button. If you've really enjoyed it, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so, and hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.